Yep. Welcome the officers from Treasury. You don't usually make opening statements, but I'll ask you if you wish to.
No, I don't want to make an opening statement on behalf of the Australian Treasury. Thank you, Sandra.
So we'll proceed to questions. Senator Cameron or Xenophon?
I can go if you want.
Right.
Go ahead. Yeah. I was waiting for one of your opening statements. Mr. Wilcock, the summary of the Charities Bill in the UK says that the bill is to provide a legal and regulatory environment which will enable all charities to realise their potential as a force for good in society. Second point is to encourage a vibrant and diverse sector independent of government. And the third is to sustain high levels of public confidence in charities through effective regulation. Is there any of those aims that may be a problem given our current configuration of dealing with charities through the tax office?
Thank you, Senator, for your question.
It's a bit self-criticism.
I think the way that I would answer that is to note that, of course, Australia is a federation, and that in Australia at the Commonwealth government level, the main connection that we have to the not-for-profit sector generally, including the charity sector, is through the tax system, and in relation especially to the level of concessionality that the sector is able to access. So unlike some other countries where the interactions between the state and the not-for-profit or the charitable sector might be gathered into a set of law and be administered by a particular body which deals with the whole gamut of the interactions between the state and that sector. In Australia, of course, as a federation, there are particular aspects of the not-for-profit or charitable sector regulation which are undertaken at the state or territory level, and then there are some that are undertaken at the federal level. And as I've mentioned, the bulk of those, I think, really relate to the access to concessionality.
So if a Charities Commission was to be established in Australia, there'd have to be a COAG process undertaken? Some process, again, depending on, if you like, what the scope of such a Charities Commission might be, what its role, responsibilities and functions and powers might be. If it were one where people contemplate a commission that would, as I said, cover the whole range of interactions between the state and that sector, then as my understanding is that there is not sufficient constitutional power for the Commonwealth to seek to cover that whole field, and that it would therefore be necessary for the Commonwealth to act in concert with the state and territories, now either through a COAG process or some other process, but it would probably require resort to, for example, mirror legislation or referral of powers or some other sets of arrangements to achieve the creation of a body that did have such a wide remit. One of the issues that, and the reason I'm talking about a commission is it's been a consistent, flavour for this inquiry, even though it's not the bill, but it's arisen from the debate and discussions in relation to Senator Xenophon's bill. One of the issues I'm particularly interested in is the information asymmetry that exists in relation to charities. The best guess we have, as I understand it, is the Productivity Commission analysis of what the cost to the public purse is in supporting charities, and that ranges anywhere from $1 billion to $8 billion. Do you have any better understanding of the cost to the public purse of support of charities?
Senator, I think the Productivity Commission is probably as authoritative as any body in seeking to put an estimate on those costs, insofar as it's seeking to estimate costs not just at the Commonwealth level, but indeed across all jurisdictions. Within the Commonwealth itself, there is a process which results in the production annually of a so-called tax expenditure statement, and so that looks at estimating the cost of the tax concessions or the tax expenditures at the Commonwealth level. My colleague probably could speak a little bit more authoritatively, but I note that what is in that statement tends to be identified at the level of sort of fairly wide ranges. Do you have anything to add, Sandra?
In the tax expenditure statement, the itemisation for charities is unquantifiable, but there is kind of not in the tax expenditure statement, but the range of $1 billion is something that has been bandied around in the past. There is no official number.
It just seems a bit convenient, $1 billion. And I say I'm not making any comment, but that just does seem a nice round figure. But it is in the billions of dollars, billion or billions.
It will depend on what we're talking about in terms of which tax concession. So we're talking, $1 billion is about the income tax concession for charities, but there are other tax concessions for charities which some have figures, some do not.
Is there any other areas of government expenditure that is so information poor?
I think there's a few.
I wouldn't hazard a guess as to. I wouldn't want to get into this of trying to compare.
But there are other areas in the tax expenditure statement where the figures are unquantifiable.
Yeah. But do you concede there's an information asymmetry in relation to charities?
In terms of the information that is available to charities versus the information that is available to the government?
Available to legislators and available to government.
As I mentioned, Sandra, I think probably the main interaction between the Commonwealth and this sector is through the tax system.
And I should separately acknowledge Mr. Hardy as representative of the ATO in the Treasury. I'm sorry.
And I suppose, just generally speaking, whenever the government, if you like, imposes some obligation on an element or indeed on the whole community, effectively there's some sort of trade-offs between the cost of that, in this particular case, information provision and the benefits that might flow. I think in the tax system it may often be the case that the production of more and better information may well indeed come at a cost, and therefore an assessment of where the right place in striking that trade-off is can differ from time to time and from individual to individual.
There was some evidence in relation to costs in the UK and costs in New Zealand, and given the amount of money we're talking about, it didn't seem to me to be a huge impost on the public purse to either work within the charity budget that's there, or add a small proportion to get more information to the public, to legislators, to the Parliament in general.
I mean, I think the points of view that you're putting, Senator, are certainly quite valid. And as I said, though, I think in the end it probably comes down to, if you like, policy choices by different governments and indeed by different parliaments from time to time about where the appropriate place to strike the balance might be at any particular time. I note, for example, that in relation to this particular sector, which of course has different components, some of the components of the sector are able to access various concessions on the basis of processes which, if you like, involve an approach to the ATO and a decision by the ATO. So there is, if you like, a degree of to access those concessions, there is already a recognition that individual entities will have to take some proactive steps to ensure that they reveal themselves to the ATO, that the ATO can make certain judgments, and therefore in relation to those sorts of entities, presumably there is more and better information available than there might be in relation to other entities where a self-assessment process is allowed.
necessarily on a self-assessment basis, some of those entities might, if you like, be below the radar screen, may not be as evident to not just the ATO but to the general populace.